The Panama Canal, 2 world wars, and the largest machine that ever walked the earth. Bucyrus-Erie built all of them. For 131 years, if something massive needed to be dug, moved, or stripped from the ground, this company got the call. They were the most important name in heavy equipment that most people have never heard of. But then, Goldman Sachs loaded them with $100 million of debt on $16 million in equity. Washington turned their coal worthless, and Caterpillar swallowed what was left. Today, every trace of the Bucyrus name has been painted over in yellow. This is the story of the steam shovel kings that vanished. It starts with a banker who had no idea what a steam shovel was. In 1880, a Cleveland financier named Daniel Parmalee Eells walked into a deal that would reshape the construction industry for more than a century. Eells was the president of the Commercial National Bank of Cleveland and sat on the boards of 32 companies. He was a deal maker, not an engineer. And when an idle foundry in the small town of Bucyrus, Ohio came up for sale, he bought it for $17,000. That foundry sat on just 1.5 acres. Its first products were not shovels at all. The Bucyrus Foundry and Manufacturing Company started by making railroad components, hand cars, locomotive drive wheels, axles, and track switches. It was bread and butter work for a small Ohio operation. But in 1882, orders came in from the Northern Pacific and Ohio Central Railroads for something different. They wanted steam shovels. And so Eells, the banker who had never operated a piece of heavy equipment in his life, pivoted his tiny foundry into the steam shovel business. The gamble paid off quickly. Between 1882 and 1885, Bucyrus sold 10 shovels and turned $80,000 in profit. By 1888, that number had climbed to 49 shovels. And in 1883, their consolidated steam shovel and derrick took first prize at the National Exposition of Railway Appliances in Chicago. A small foundry in rural Ohio was suddenly competing with established manufacturers on a national stage. Then came a decision that nearly killed the company before it ever reached the Panama Canal. In October of 1891, Bucyrus relocated its entire operation to South Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The deal looked attractive on paper. $50,000 in cash plus $45,000 worth of land, 8 acres right next to the Chicago and Northwestern Railroad, and a Lake Michigan dock. But the move was a disaster. Only about 10% of the Ohio workforce made the trip. The rest had to be replaced with Polish, Armenian, German, and Bohemian immigrants who had never built heavy equipment before. By 1895, the company was effectively bankrupt. Daniel Eells' own son Howard had to be named receiver just to keep the doors open. They reorganized as the Bucyrus Company in 1896 and did not fully emerge from insolvency until 1897. But the company did not just survive. It came back swinging. By 1899, Bucyrus had built a 95-ton steam shovel with a 5-cubic-yard dipper that the trade press called the largest ever built. Steam shovels had gone from a sideline product to 80% of the company's total revenue. The banker's gamble on heavy equipment was paying off in ways that Daniel Eells could never have predicted from his office at the Commercial National Bank. And that near-death experience makes what happened next even more remarkable. Because by 1904, the United States government came calling with the biggest construction project in human history. The Panama Canal. We tend to think of the canal as one big American achievement, but the reality on the ground at the Culebra Cut was brutal, mechanical, and deeply dangerous. Bucyrus won the contract to supply the majority of the steam shovels. 77 of the 102 shovels that carved through the Continental Divide carried the Bucyrus name. Marion Power Shovel, the rival from just 15 miles down the road in Ohio, supplied 24. A company called Thew supplied 1. Each Bucyrus shovel at the canal operated with a crew of 4, an engineer, 2 firemen, and a craneman, plus 6 ground workers. Operators earned between $210 and $240 a month, which came with free housing and medical care. In March of 1910, a single Bucyrus shovel set a canal record by moving 70,000 cubic yards of earth in just 26 days. When the Cucaracha slide dumped 500,000 cubic yards of mud into the cut in 1907, it was Bucyrus machines that dug it back out. But the canal was not just an engineering achievement, it was a graveyard. In December of 1908, a dynamite explosion at the canal killed 23 workers and injured 49 more. The official death toll for the entire American construction era was 5,609. Combined French and American estimates put the real number somewhere between 25,000 and 30,000. In November of 1906, President Theodore Roosevelt traveled to Panama and climbed into the cab of a Bucyrus steam shovel for what became one of the most famous photographs of the entire project. The image of a sitting American president at the controls of a steam shovel in the middle of the jungle captured something about the scale of what was happening there. And for Bucyrus, it was the ultimate endorsement. By 1911, the company's net worth had reached $2.3 million. Corporate profits from the canal years between 1905 and 1907 alone totaled $500,000. The idle foundry that Daniel Eells bought for $17,000 was now the dominant force in heavy earth-moving equipment on the planet. At least one of those original Panama Canal shovels survives. A Marion model sits at the University of Costa Rica in Turrialba. A Bucyrus 50 Bicoa B rests at the Nederland Mining Museum in Colorado. If this construction history matters to you, take a second and hit like and subscribe. We cover stories like this every week. Now, the Panama Canal made Bucyrus famous, but it was the decades that followed that turned them into an empire. In 1927, Bucyrus merged with the Erie Steam Shovel Company from Erie, Pennsylvania. Erie had built the first lightweight power shovels during World War I, the 20-ton Type B in 1915, and the 13-ton Type A in 1916. The combined company became Bucyrus-Erie, and the industry called them the longest line, because their product catalog covered everything from small utility shovels to the largest mining machines on Earth. But the real engineering leap had started earlier. In 1912, Bucyrus pioneered electric power for excavators using a Ward-Leonard direct current control system, and in 1913, a Norwegian-born engineer named Oscar Martinsen filed a patent for something that would define the company for the next 80 years. He called it the Martinsen tractor. We know it today as the walking dragline mechanism. It used a tub base with eccentric cam-driven walking shoes that allowed machines weighing thousands of tons to literally walk across the ground at about 12 feet per step. Bucyrus acquired the rights to this technology in 1931 when they purchased the Monaghan Manufacturing Company of Chicago. And from that point forward, they owned the future of large-scale surface mining. Before we get to the machines that made Bucyrus-Erie legendary, we need to talk about what happened when the world went to war. Twice. But first, understand the scale of what Bucyrus-Erie was producing in the decades between the wars. The 50B, introduced in 1923, became the first heavy-duty shovel with full 360-degree rotation. 534 units rolled out of South Milwaukee between 1923 and 1939. Then came the 10B in 1934, which became the company's mass-market workhorse. Over the next 25 years, Bucyrus-Erie built 10,053 10B units that shipped to construction sites and mines across the globe. No other model in the company's history came close to those production numbers. And the company was not just building machines, it was collecting engineering firsts. For example, the first 180-degree revolving steam shovel, the first crawler-mounted dragline, the Class 14, built in 1911, and the first gasoline-powered excavators built between 1910 and 1911. By the time the wars came, Bucyrus-Erie had the deepest engineering bench in the industry. During World War I, the South Milwaukee factory produced 150,000 8-inch artillery shells and 100 recoil slides. But the detail that almost nobody talks about is what happened in 1915. A full 2 years before America officially entered the war, Bucyrus co-founded the Mississippi Valley Products Company, specifically to manufacture shell blanks for the British military. They were arming the Allies in secret, while the United States was still officially neutral. By 1918, annual sales had reached $6.6 million. World War II was even bigger. The South Milwaukee plant manufactured 240mm howitzer barrels, carriages, mounts, and transport vehicles. Between 1940 and 1944, excavator shipments alone exceeded $44 million. 2/3 of the company's entire production went directly to the war effort. At the Glassport foundry in Pennsylvania, the workforce went from under 50 people to 3,200, pouring armor steel, casting tank turrets, and forging ship anchors. By 1945, Bucyrus had delivered 3,000 units to the military and its allies. But the most unusual piece of war production came not from South Milwaukee, but from Lincoln, England. In 1930, Bucyrus formed a joint venture with the British firm Ruston and Hornsby, called Ruston Bucyrus. In 1939, Winston Churchill personally commissioned that joint venture to build one of the strangest weapons of the entire war. Churchill wanted a machine that could cut a trench through the German Siegfried Line fortifications. He called the project Cultivator No. 6. It also went by the codename White Rabbit No. 6, and the prototype was nicknamed Nellie. The initial grant was £1 million sterling. French soldiers were sent to collect soil samples along the Siegfried Line, so the engineers in Lincoln could test their designs. The Germans actually noticed the unusual patrol activity, though they never figured out what the French were looking for. The machine itself was 77 feet long, 7 feet wide, 8 feet tall, and weighed 130 tons. It could cut a trench 7.5 feet wide and 5 feet deep, while moving at roughly 2/3 of a mile per hour. The original design called for Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same engines that powered the Spitfire. When Merlins became too valuable for the air war, the engineers redesigned the machine with dual 600-horsepower Davy-Paxman diesels instead. A scale model of the machine was built secretly by the Bassett Loke Model Company in the cellar of a hotel in Bath. Churchill ordered 200 infantry versions and 40 wider officer versions that could accommodate tanks, but only about 9 were ever built before the project was shelved. Churchill called the machine My Mole, and later said he remained impenitent about the whole affair. After the wars, Bucyrus-Erie entered what we can only call the age of the super strippers. These were the largest land machines ever constructed, built specifically to strip away hundreds of feet of overburden to reach the coal seams underneath. The scale of what the company was building in the 1960s is difficult to comprehend even today. The 3850B, nicknamed Big Hog, arrived in 1962 at Peabody Coal's Sinclair Mine in Kentucky. It weighed 18 million pounds and carried a 115 cubic yard bucket on a 215-foot boom. Only 2 were ever built. In 1960, a precision scale model of the 3850B was presented to President Dwight Eisenhower. That model was later transferred to the Smithsonian Institution. When the President of the United States receives a scale model of your product and the Smithsonian puts it in their collection, you have reached a level of industrial significance that very few companies ever touch. The 1950 B Silver Spade followed in 1965. 14 million pounds, 220 feet tall, 13,500 peak horsepower from 14 AC motors fed by a 7,200-volt trailing cable. The bucket held 105 cubic yards and could reach 390 feet, and the entire machine was controlled by just 2 hand levers and 2 foot pedals. The Silver Spade ran for 41 consecutive years, from 1965 to 2006, and moved 607,226,370 cubic yards of earth. That is roughly twice the volume of the entire Panama Canal. When it was finally scrapped in February of 2007, it was the longest-serving superstripper in history. In 1967, the Gem of Egypt joined the fleet with a 130 cubic yard bucket on a shorter boom designed for a different mine geometry. 25,000 people attended its dedication ceremony at the Egypt Valley mine site. When 25,000 people show up to watch a shovel start digging, you know the machines have become something larger than industrial equipment. They had become spectacles. And then in 1969 came the machine that pushed Bucyrus-Erie into territory no engineering company had ever reached before. The machine that became both the crowning achievement and, eventually, part of the undoing of the company that built it. The 4250W Big Muskie was completed on May 22, 1969. Only one was ever built. It weighed 13,500 short tons, stood 222 feet tall, and stretched 487 feet long. The bucket held 220 cubic yards, enough to fit 2 Greyhound buses inside. The machine drew 52,500 horsepower from 28 DC motors and consumed between 14 and 18,000 kilowatts continuously. That is the same electrical load as a town of 27,500 people. Assembly required 200,000 man-hours, 340 railcars, and 260 trucks. The boom was actually 2 2570 model booms joined together. The wire ropes were 5 inches thick, the largest ever manufactured at the time. Individual chain links weighed roughly 1,000 pounds each, and Big Muskie held one distinction that no other dragline in history could claim. It was the only dragline ever built with hydraulic walking cylinders instead of the traditional mechanical walking shoes. Big Muskie operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 364 days a year for 22 years. It moved 608 million cubic yards of earth. Like and subscribe if you want to see more stories about the machines that built our world. But the empire that Bucyrus-Erie had built was standing on ground that was about to shift underneath it. In 1974, Bucyrus-Erie looked invincible. The company had a $636 million order backlog, roughly a 15-year supply of work. That is not a typo. 15 years of orders already booked. They doubled their factory space from 2.3 million to 4.6 million square feet and expanded the workforce by 80% to keep up with demand. By 1979, shipments hit $550 million. Revenue had grown 7 times since 1962. Profit had increased by 2,500%. The company was the undisputed king of mining equipment, with a product line that stretched from utility shovels to walking drag lines that weighed more than most buildings. The only competitor that came close was P&H, which had introduced its Magnetorque electric drive system in 1946. P&H would later become Joy Global, before Komatsu acquired them in 2017 for $3.7 billion. But in 1979, Bucyrus-Erie was the one setting the pace. And then the world changed. Oil prices collapsed in the early 1980s, and with them went the economics of coal mining that had justified the construction of machines like Big Muskie and the Silver Spade. Environmental regulations tightened across the board. The Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act had already imposed strict requirements on strip mine operators, and the public backlash against mountaintop removal and strip mining in Appalachia was growing louder every year. Suddenly, the market for giant stripping shovels and draglines, the machines that had made Bucyrus-Erie dominant and driven those 2,500% profit gains, was shrinking fast, and nobody was ordering new ones. In 1982, the company made what many consider its first fatal mistake. They acquired Western Gear Corporation, a California aerospace firm that had nothing to do with mining or construction. Internal documents later described the purchase as an insupportable drain on resources. It was a classic diversification blunder. A company that knew how to build the largest machines on Earth thought it could run an aerospace business on the other side of the country, and it bled cash from the start. In 1984, management created a holding company called Bicor Western in a failed attempt at a takeover defense. The corporate structure was getting more complicated while the core business was getting weaker. By 1987, outside consultants delivered a blunt assessment. They told the board that profitability was not likely to improve until 1990, if then. That assessment turned out to be wildly optimistic, and then Wall Street showed up. In 1988, Goldman Sachs executed a leveraged buyout that loaded the company with $100 million in debt, against just $16 million in equity. Think about those numbers for a second. $100 million in debt on $16 million in real value. The annual debt service alone was $21 million, meaning the company had to generate $21 million in cash every single year just to service the interest before it could spend a dollar on operations, maintenance, or new equipment. For a company already struggling with declining orders in a shrinking market, it was a financial death sentence written on Wall Street letterhead. Meanwhile, in Eastern Ohio, the Clean Air Act of 1990 was making the high-sulfur coal that Big Muskie had been uncovering for 2 decades essentially unmarketable. Power plants across the country were switching to low-sulfur Western coal from Wyoming and Montana. The coal that Big Muskie stripped from the earth was suddenly worth less than the electricity it cost to run the machine. The dragline that consumed the power of an entire town and had moved more than 600 million cubic yards of earth suddenly had no economic reason to exist. Big Muskie was retired in January of 1991 after 22 years of continuous operation. The largest mobile land machine ever built simply stopped walking. Between 1990 and 1993, Bucyrus-Erie posted $108 million in net losses. Revenue crashed to $198 million. The Goldman Sachs debt was strangling a company that might have weathered the market downturn if it had not been leveraged to the breaking point. On February 18, 1994, Bucyrus-Erie filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company that had dug the Panama Canal and armed both world wars was now at the mercy of its creditors in a federal courthouse. Creditors accepted 87% of the company's stock in exchange for forgiving $135 million in debt. 10 months later, on December 14th, the company emerged from bankruptcy, but it was a shadow of what it had been. The workforce was gutted, the product line was narrow, and the Bucyrus name carried the stain of a Wall Street leveraged buyout that never should have happened. Now here is where the story takes a turn that nobody expected. The company that Goldman Sachs nearly killed was about to be resurrected by a man who already knew where all the bodies were buried. Sullivan had joined Bucyrus in 1976, left in 1998, and returned in January of 2000. When he walked back through the door, the company was losing $33 million a year on revenue of $280 million, with just 1,700 employees left. The post-bankruptcy company had no acquisitions, no growth strategy, and no confidence from the market. Sullivan understood that the mining equipment business had not disappeared. It had consolidated. The question was whether Bucyrus would be the company doing the consolidating, or the one getting swallowed. But Sullivan had a plan that started with eliminating the company's oldest enemy. Since 1884, the Marion Power Shovel Company had operated just 15 miles down the road from the original Bucyrus foundry in Ohio. For 113 years, the two companies had battled for every major contract on Earth. At the Panama Canal, Bucyrus took 77 shovels, and Marion got 24. When Bucyrus built the Silver Spade in 1965, Marion responded the same year with the 6360, nicknamed the Captain. It was the largest power shovel ever built, 15,000 tons, a 180 cubic yard dipper, a 215-foot boom, and a $25 million price tag. Bucyrus proposed their own response, the 4950B, but no customer ever ordered one. When NASA needed crawler transporters to carry rockets at Cape Canaveral in the early 1960s, Bucyrus proposed a design. Marion won the bid and built two transporters for $14 million each. Those crawlers are still carrying rockets today, 6 decades later. Marion sold to Dresser Industries in 1977, then got spun off to Global Industrial Technologies. But the competition never stopped. The rivalry was so intense that the two companies managed to agree on exactly one thing in over a century: a single patent cross-license, where Marion licensed its knee action crowd mechanism to Bucyrus, and Bucyrus licensed its cable crowd mechanism to Marion. That was the only cooperative agreement between the two rivals in 113 years of competition. In 1997, 3 years before Sullivan returned, Bucyrus acquired Marion for $40.1 million. The Marion factory in Ohio was closed. 113 years of rivalry ended with a purchase agreement. And with Marion came the NASA crawler transporter contract and every other Marion customer on the books. If this story is keeping you watching, hit like and subscribe so we can keep making these documentaries. Sullivan used that foundation and kept building. In 2007, he acquired the German mining equipment maker DBT for $710 million, giving Bucyrus a foothold in underground mining and European markets. In 2010, he bought Terex Mining for $1.3 billion, adding trucks and hydraulic shovels to the lineup. Revenue climbed from $280 million to $3.65 billion, a 14 times increase. Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization went from essentially nothing to $850 million, an 800 times improvement. The workforce grew from 1,700 to 11,800 employees, spread across manufacturing plants on multiple continents. Fortune magazine named Bucyrus the 9th fastest growing company in America. The company that had been bankrupt just 6 years before Sullivan arrived was now one of the fastest expanding industrial firms in the country. Sullivan had pulled off one of the most dramatic corporate turnarounds in American industrial history. And that is exactly when Caterpillar came calling. On November 15, 2010, Caterpillar announced its intention to acquire Bucyrus International. The timing was deliberate. The global mining boom was in full swing, commodity prices were soaring, and Caterpillar wanted to dominate the mining equipment market the same way they dominated construction. Bucyrus, with its draglines, electric rope shovels, and deep mining relationships across 6 continents, was the missing piece. The initial offer was $68 per share. The Bucyrus board rejected it. A bidding war followed. The final price settled at $92 per share, a 32% premium over the original bid. The total deal, including net debt, came to approximately $8.6 billion. It was the largest acquisition in Caterpillar's history by a wide margin. The deal closed on July 8, 2011, after clearing both the Department of Justice and Chinese regulatory review. Tim Sullivan walked away with approximately $48.5 million. Investors who had bought shares at the 2004 initial public offering price of $18 per share realized a 411% return in 7 years. And then the erasure began. Caterpillar painted every Bucyrus machine yellow. They replaced the Bucyrus model numbers with CAT designations. The Bucyrus name was removed from every product, every document, every piece of marketing. 131 years of brand identity disappeared under yellow paint and new part numbers. At the South Milwaukee factory, the one that had been running since April of 1893, Caterpillar laid off 300 workers in March of 2012, roughly 40% of the hourly workforce. By 2015, approximately 450 jobs were gone, 55% of the total. Engineering was transferred to Tucson, Arizona. Production ceased entirely in 2016. South Milwaukee had been a Bucyrus town for over a century. Generations of families had worked in that factory, sons following fathers onto the shop floor. The factory that had built Panama Canal shovels, World War artillery shells, Churchill's secret weapon, and the largest mobile land machine in human history fell silent after 123 continuous years of operation. The machines kept working around the world, but the place that built them was done. So where are the giants today? Big Muskie, the only dragline ever built with hydraulic walking cylinders, was scrapped in 1999. The machine that cost $25 million in 1969, roughly $219 million adjusted, was cut apart and sold as scrap metal for $700,000. The bucket survived. It sits at Miners Memorial Park in McConnellsville, Ohio, where visitors can walk up and climb inside. Big Hog, the 3850B that once stripped overburden at Peabody Coal's Kentucky mine, met a different fate. In 1986, the machine was buried in its own last mining pit. It is still down there. Big Brutus, the 1850B, fared better than most. The machine stands preserved in West Mineral, Kansas, where it was added to the National Register of Historic Places in 2018. About 22,000 visitors come to see it every year, making it the largest electric shovel still in existence. The land where Big Muskie once walked has been turned into something entirely different. The Wilds, a 10,000-acre wildlife conservation park, opened in 1994 on the former strip mine in eastern Ohio, where a 13,500-ton dragline once consumed the power of an entire town. Endangered species now roam grasslands that were reclaimed from the scarred earth. Not everything disappeared, though. Across the world, Bucyrus machines are still standing and in some cases still working. In Yorkshire, England, a BE 1150 RB walking dragline from 1946 sits preserved at the St. Aidan's Nature Reserve. In Alberta, Canada, a 1917 Class 24 dragline at the Reynolds, Alberta Museum is believed to be the oldest surviving dragline in existence. And at the Beamish Museum in England, a Ruston Bucyrus 25 RB from 1931, one of the machines from that same joint venture that built Churchill's Cultivator, is on permanent display. The machines that are still working tell an even bigger story. A Bucyrus dragline called Ursa Major, a 2570 WS model, is still digging at the Black Thunder coal mine in Wyoming. It is the largest operational dragline in North America. More than 70 Bucyrus-built draglines are still working across the coal mines of Australia. and the Caterpillar 7495 electric rope shovel, with roughly 237 units built and more than 105 billion tons of material moved worldwide, is the direct engineering descendant of the machines that came out of South Milwaukee. If you see a CAT 7495 loading haul trucks at a copper mine in Chile or an iron ore pit in Western Australia, you are looking at Bucyrus DNA under a coat of Caterpillar yellow. In August of 2021, a museum opened in South Milwaukee dedicated to the company that ran that town for over a century. It holds 20,000 artifacts from the Bucyrus era. The factory next door sits empty. Daniel Parmalee Eells paid $17,000 for an idol foundry in 1880. 131 years later, Caterpillar paid $8.6 billion for what it became. And the name Bucyrus-Erie, the company that dug the canal, armed the wars, built Churchill's mole, and moved more earth than any company in history, is now a line item on a Caterpillar balance sheet. Like this video and subscribe if you want more stories about the lost giants of the construction industry. We will see you in the next one.